Now here's today's edition of The Achievers, an engineer who used his training to solve business problems. The name Douglas Orane is synonymous with GraceKennedy and quality management. After 30 years of passionately serving that company in various capacities, and often seen it through good times as well as turbulent times, Orane has retired both as a managing director and later as chairman of the GraceKennedy Board, but continues as a director of the conglomerate. I interviewed him on an array of issues, including his engineering skills and how this has helped him in decision making. It's part of a three-part series for the Achievers. All aspiring for leadership should watch this interview, particularly the values which drive this great Jamaican. Mr. Orane, your name has become synonymous with GraceKennedy. One could say they are inextricably bound. Tell us about the early years, your training, how you came to be with the group. Tell us about those early years.
I'm an engineer originally. Very few people know that, and I've always had a curiosity about the world around me. One of the things I was curious about is how the companies build and grow in a world that's changing. So I joined GraceKennedy in 1980, and I said to many people at the time, I found it so exciting because GraceKennedy was involved in so many different lines of business. Also, GraceKennedy was in a position where the values of GraceKennedy matched with mine exactly. Grace, we care, our promise is kept, our word is our bond. All of these things were very important to me personally and also to GraceKennedy. So I really enjoyed being at the company, joining in the early 80s. Of course, it was a time of tremendous change. It was a time when we were moving from the 70s with our experiment with socialism into a market-led economy. Also, globalization, which is probably the mega trend that has been most consistent in my career and how we have actually coped with that. And from the very beginning, my approach is to treat it positively, to say this is an opportunity for GraceKennedy and Jamaica and not a threat to us.
Now, tell us about some of those opportunities that you experienced and executed from the 80s onwards. And I'd also like you to tell us about some of the challenges too, because in life, challenges are as inevitable as night follows day. You've straddled several eras as an executive, and interestingly, an engineer. What about engineers that makes them so efficient? I've encountered a couple of business persons who were trained as engineers, and they are in other fields and they're able to execute and do it. What is it?
Well, I think it is the way our minds are trained. When I was an undergraduate at Glasgow University in Scotland, my tutor said to me, "Douglas, we didn't bring you here to learn engineering. We brought you here to learn how to think." And that's exactly what I did learn in those 4 years. So I think it brings a certain logic to the way we solve problems, collecting information, analyzing it, and then coming to a conclusion. There's something else about engineers that is very important relative to business, and that is engineers know we have to solve problems with incomplete information. You know, you'll never collect all the information you want, and you just ultimately need to make a call and say, this is it, I'm going to design that bridge, or I'm going to build that building, or start that engine and see how it works. And so using a similar approach in business, it gives a certain practicality. There's something else that's very important, which I'd like to share, because it's something I practice up to this day. I practice as an industrial engineer, which is about how to increase one's productivity. So I use that technique every day to improve my own productivity. I'm very aware of each of us only having 24 hours a day. What makes the difference between the most successful individual in the world and somebody who's begging on a street corner? They have the same 24 hours, but it's how we use it. So one of the things I've learned to do is to prioritize. People who work with me know I walk around with a little notebook and I have a list of things to do, which is never ending, but there's always one item on that list. I say I must do it today, and it gets done, and then I move on to the second one. It's a very powerful technique. It's an industrial engineering technique for productivity improvement. But in addition to that, I believe it can help our young people who are faced with such a massive number of choices in their lives today to help to prioritize and decide how to move ahead in that regard.
And to use time more efficiently.
Oh, you're so right in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, there's somebody who came to Jamaica about 15 years ago. He was interviewed on radio, and he's the founder of a company called On the Frontier, and he said this, I've never forgot it. He says, people who go late to meetings live in poor countries. And he went on to expand to say, it doesn't mean if you start going early to meetings, you're going to be wealthy. But to become wealthy, being punctual is an absolute prerequisite. You have to start there, and then you build from there. And in our society, it's something we can do. In fact, in GraceKennedy, we actually said, you know, this is about 15 years ago, in the late 90s. We said, you know, this issue of a lack of timeliness is creeping in. We want to stop it. And we said from Monday, everything must start to the minute. And that's exactly what happened. And the way you do it is to apply peer pressure. You say, we are here to start at 8. Whoever is here will start, and whoever comes late, we're not going to repeat things for you. We're not going to go over what was covered before. And in addition to that, when individuals walk in late, people sort of look at you askance and say, what are you doing coming at that time? That's not part of our culture.
Yes. Fascinating traits which every ambitious person should emulate. In subsequent Achievers features, Douglas Orane tells of his team approach to problem solving, his penchant for succession planning, his views on failure, and much more. Did Douglas throw up his hands in despair when a cataclysmic event occurred that wiped out over 25% of the company's profits? No, he didn't. Don't miss a subsequent edition of The Achievers, a feature geared at celebrating success.